It was one of those days when the city seemed to breathe life into itself. The streets of New York were bustling, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked concrete and the faint aroma of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. As the skies darkened, heavy clouds rolled in, and raindrops began to fall in a steady rhythm, like nature's own symphony. Amidst the chaos of umbrellas popping open and hurried footsteps, a woman stepped into the grand lobby of the city's most luxurious hotel. She didn't look like she belonged there, at least not by society's standards. Her coat was worn at the edges, its once vibrant color now faded to a muted gray. Her shoes, scuffed and tired, carried the weight of countless miles. Yet there was something about her, a quiet dignity that seemed to defy her humble appearance. Her eyes, deep and unwavering, held a sense of purpose as if she carried a secret that no one else could fathom. The hotel lobby was a world unto itself, a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the marble floors that gleamed as if polished by moonlight. Guests moved about in tailored suits and designer dresses, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of piano music playing in the background. It was a place that exuded opulence, where every detail seemed designed to remind you that this was no ordinary hotel. The woman paused for a moment at the entrance, taking it all in. She wasn't intimidated. No, her expression was calm, almost serene. She walked toward the reception desk with measured steps, her presence barely noticed by those around her. To them, she was invisible, a shadow passing through their world of privilege and excess. Behind the desk stood a young man in his late 20s, his hair perfectly styled and his suit impeccably tailored. His name tag read, Ethan, and he carried himself with an air of self-assuredness that bordered on arrogance. He glanced up as she approached, his practiced smile faltering for just a moment before returning with a hint of condescension. "Good afternoon," she said softly, her voice steady but unassuming. "I'd like to book a room for the night." Ethan hesitated, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. He took in her frayed coat, her simple attire, and the absence of anything resembling luxury. In that brief moment, he made his judgment, a silent verdict rendered without trial. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his tone polite but distant. "We're fully booked." The woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. "Fully booked?" she repeated, her voice carrying no trace of disbelief or accusation, just curiosity. "Yes," Ethan replied quickly, eager to end the conversation. "We're at capacity tonight." She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his face. There was no anger in her eyes, no sign of humiliation, only an unsettling calm that seemed to unsettle him more than any outburst could have. "Thank you," she said simply before turning to leave. As she walked away, Ethan couldn't help but watch her go. There was something about her that lingered in his mind, a quiet strength that seemed out of place in someone so unremarkable on the surface. But he quickly dismissed the thought. After all, this was New York City. People came and went every day, each carrying their own stories that rarely intersected with his own. The woman stepped back into the rain-soaked streets, disappearing into the crowd as if swallowed by the city itself. Inside the hotel lobby, life went on as usual. Guests checked in and out, conversations buzzed with excitement, and no one gave a second thought to the woman who had just been turned away. But what none of them knew, what even Ethan couldn't have imagined, was that this seemingly insignificant encounter would set into motion a chain of events that would shake their world to its very core. Because this woman wasn't just anyone. She wasn't some random passerby looking for shelter from the storm. She was someone who mattered. And soon enough, they would all find out just how much. The rain had stopped by the time the clock struck midnight, leaving the city glistening under the glow of streetlights. Inside the hotel, the night shift staff moved like shadows, their voices hushed as they prepared for another quiet evening. But up on the top floor, in a suite that seemed to float above the city, there was nothing quiet about what was happening. The man who owned this hotel, this empire of marble and crystal, was sitting in a leather armchair, his back to the panoramic view of New York City. His name was Alexander Pierce, and he was the kind of man who commanded attention without ever needing to raise his voice. His presence was magnetic, his every movement deliberate, like a lion surveying its territory. Tonight, however, There was a storm brewing inside him that no one could see. Alexander had spent years building his legacy from the ground up. He wasn't born into wealth. He had earned every dollar with grit and determination. But with success came distance, from old friends, from simpler times, and even from his own sense of humility. Lately, though, something had been gnawing at him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. And tonight, it had come crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He leaned forward, running a hand through his dark hair as he listened to the night manager recount the events of the day. The manager's voice was steady but hesitant, as though he knew he was treading on dangerous ground. There was an incident earlier, the manager began cautiously. A woman came in asking for a room. Alexander raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He motioned for the man to continue. She didn't look. Well, she didn't look like our usual clientele, the manager admitted, choosing his words carefully. Ethan at the front desk turned her away. For a moment, there was silence. Alexander's expression didn't change, but there was a shift in the air around him, something almost imperceptible but impossible to ignore. And why? Alexander asked finally, his voice low and measured. Did Ethan turn her away? The manager hesitated. He said we were fully booked. Alexander let out a soft laugh, cold and sharp like broken glass. Fully booked, he repeated. In a hotel with over 200 rooms? The manager swallowed hard but didn't respond. Alexander stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. A man who had everything yet felt an ache he couldn't explain. Describe her, he said after a long pause. The manager shifted uncomfortably. She was simple-looking, wore an old coat. Nothing about her stood out. Alexander turned around slowly, his eyes narrowing as if trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't quite fit. What time did she come in, he asked. Around 5, the manager replied. And then it hit him, a memory so vivid it felt like it had just happened. Around 5 o'clock that evening, Alexander had received a text message from his wife. I'll be stopping by your hotel later tonight. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Their schedules rarely aligned these days, and messages like that were common between them. But now he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Did she say anything else? Alexander pressed. The manager shook his head. No, sir. She just left when Ethan told her we couldn't accommodate her. Alexander's jaw tightened as realization dawned on him. The woman they had turned away, the one who didn't fit their image of wealth and status, was none other than his wife. His wife. The thought sent a chill down his spine, not because of what it meant for him personally, but because of what it revealed about everything he had built. This hotel wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was supposed to be a reflection of his values, his vision for what hospitality could be. And yet here they were, turning away someone who mattered more to him than anyone else in the world simply because she didn't look the part. Alexander felt a surge of anger, not at Ethan or the manager, but at himself. He had allowed this culture to take root under his watch, this toxic obsession with appearances that blinded them to what truly mattered. Without another word, Alexander grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Sir, the manager called after him. Tell Ethan to meet me in my office first thing tomorrow morning, Alexander said over his shoulder before disappearing into the elevator. As he descended toward the lobby, Alexander's mind raced with thoughts of how he would make this right, not just for his wife, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small or invisible in a place that should have welcomed them with open arms. When he reached the lobby, it was nearly empty except for a few staff members cleaning up for the night. He stepped outside into the cool night air and looked up at the towering facade of his hotel, a monument to success that suddenly felt hollow. He pulled out his phone and dialed his wife's number. It rang twice before she picked up. Hello? Her voice came through softly on the other end of the line. It's me, Alexander said quietly. Where are you? There was a pause before she answered. Home. I'm coming over, he said firmly. Another pause, longer this time. And then, all right. As Alexander hailed a cab and climbed inside, he couldn't help but think about how easily things could have gone unnoticed if not for that nagging feeling in his gut, the one that told him something wasn't right even before he knew what it was. And as he stared out at the city speeding past him through rain-streaked windows, one thought kept echoing in his mind. Tomorrow would be different. It had to be different. Because this wasn't just about fixing one mistake. It was about tearing down an entire way of thinking and rebuilding something better in its place. Something real. The morning light spilled through the towering windows of the hotel's grand conference room, casting long streaks of gold across the polished mahogany table. The room, usually reserved for high-stakes meetings with investors or glittering celebrations of success, now felt heavy with an unfamiliar tension. The staff had been summoned, every single one of them, and they sat in uneasy silence, their whispers subdued as they exchanged nervous glances. No one knew exactly why they were there, but the air was thick with anticipation. At the head of the table stood Alexander Pierce, the man who built this empire brick by brick. He was a commanding figure, his tailored suit immaculate, his presence as sharp and unyielding as the edge of a blade. But today, there was something different about him. His usual air of calm authority was tinged with something deeper, something raw. His eyes, usually calculating and composed, carried a weight that seemed to pierce through everyone in the room. Beside him stood a woman who didn't belong in this world of luxury and excess, at least not by appearances. She was dressed simply, her clothes neat but unremarkable. Her face was calm, her posture straight, but there was a quiet power about her that made it impossible to look away. She wasn't just standing there. She was present, like a storm waiting to break. Alexander let the silence stretch for a moment longer before he spoke. His voice was steady but carried an edge that cut through the room like a knife. "Yesterday," he began, "something happened in this hotel that I cannot ignore." The room went still. Every eye was on him now. Every breath held as though the entire staff had collectively decided not to exhale until he finished speaking. A woman walked into this lobby. Alexander continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. She asked for a room, a simple request. But instead of being treated with respect and dignity, she was judged. Judged by her appearance. Judged by assumptions. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the next blow. And she was turned away. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Some shifted in their seats. Others stared down at their hands, as if hoping to disappear into the wood grain of the table. Alexander's voice grew sharper now, each word landing like a hammer on an anvil. This hotel, my hotel, was built on principles of excellence and inclusivity. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. When you walk through those doors, you are supposed to feel welcome. He glanced at Ethan, the young man from the front desk who now looked pale and stricken. "But yesterday we failed." Ethan opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, but Alexander held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not interested in excuses," he said firmly. "I'm interested in accountability." He turned to face the woman standing beside him and gestured toward her with an open hand. "This," he said, his voice softening just slightly, "is my wife." The room erupted into stunned silence, an almost audible gasp that seemed to suck all the air out of the space. Ethan's face turned crimson as realization dawned on him, and several others exchanged wide-eyed looks of disbelief. "Yes," Alexander continued, his tone now laced with something almost like sadness. "The woman you turned away yesterday is my wife, the co-founder of this hotel, and someone who has poured her heart and soul into making it what it is today." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air as he looked around the room, his gaze lingering on each face as if daring them to meet his eyes. "I brought her here today," he said slowly, "not to shame anyone but to teach all of us, including myself, a lesson." He stepped back slightly, giving his wife space to speak if she chose to. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with quiet strength. "When I walked into this hotel yesterday," she began, "I wasn't expecting special treatment because of who I am or what I've done. I didn't come here as Alexander's wife or your boss. I came here as a guest, as someone who simply needed a place to stay." She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the room with a piercing intensity that seemed to see right through everyone present. "What I experienced wasn't just rejection," she continued softly but firmly. "It was judgment, judgment based on nothing more than how I looked." Her voice grew stronger now, each word carrying an undeniable truth. "And if that's how you treat me, how many others have been made to feel unwelcome? How many people have walked through those doors only to leave feeling small and invisible?" Her words struck like lightning, illuminating truths that no one in the room could deny. There were no excuses left to hide behind, only the uncomfortable reality of what had happened and what it meant. Alexander stepped forward again, his voice steady but resolute. "This is not just about one mistake," he said firmly. "It's about culture, about values, and about what kind of place we want this hotel to be." He looked directly at Ethan now, his tone softening just slightly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them." Ethan nodded quickly, his face still flushed with embarrassment, but now tinged with genuine remorse. Alexander turned back to address the entire room once more. "Starting today," he said decisively, "we're making changes, real changes, not just in policy, but in mindset." He gestured toward his wife again and added quietly but powerfully, "Because no one should ever feel like they don't belong here." The room was silent once more as Alexander's words settled over them like a heavy blanket. But this time, it wasn't an uneasy silence. It was thoughtful, reflective, even hopeful. As Alexander and his wife left the conference room together hand in hand, a united front against everything they wanted to change, the staff remained seated for several moments longer than necessary. No one spoke, no one moved. But deep down, everyone knew. Things would never be the same again. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, as Alexander and his wife stepped out of the hotel together. The day had been long, filled with difficult conversations and raw emotions, but as they walked side by side, there was a quiet sense of resolution between them. The air was crisp, carrying with it the faint hum of the city, a reminder that life moved forward, no matter how heavy the moments behind you might feel. Alexander glanced at his wife, her face serene yet thoughtful. She hadn't said much since they left the conference room, but he could feel the weight of her thoughts. He wanted to say something, to apologize again, perhaps, but he knew better. Words weren't what she needed right now. Instead, he reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that spoke louder than anything he could have said. They walked in silence for a while, their steps in sync as if they were two parts of the same rhythm. The streets were alive with people, couples laughing, children chasing each other, street performers drawing small crowds. But it all felt like background noise to the moment they were sharing. It was as though the world had faded away, leaving just the two of them in their little bubble of reflection and connection. Finally, she broke the silence. "You know," she began softly, her voice carrying a hint of both sadness and hope, "I didn't expect today to turn out like this." Alexander nodded but didn't interrupt. He knew she wasn't looking for answers. She was simply speaking her truth. "When I walked into that hotel yesterday," she continued, "I wasn't angry when they turned me away. Disappointed? Yes. Hurt? Maybe a little. But mostly, I was sad." She paused for a moment, her eyes distant as if replaying the memory in her mind. "Sad because it made me realize how easy it is for people to forget what really matters." Alexander tightened his grip on her hand slightly, his way of telling her he understood, even if he couldn't fully grasp the depth of what she felt. She turned to look at him now, her gaze steady and unwavering. "You built that hotel to be more than just a place for people to sleep. You wanted it to be a sanctuary, a space where anyone could walk through those doors and feel like they belonged." Her voice softened as she added, "But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that." He felt her words like a punch to the gut, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. And truth had a way of cutting through all your defenses, leaving you exposed and vulnerable. "I know," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I let it happen. I let myself get caught up in appearances and numbers and everything else that doesn't matter." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully now, his eyes searching hers for forgiveness, or maybe just understanding. "But I promise you, things are going to change." She studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "I believe you," she said simply. And those 3 words carried more weight than any grand declaration ever could. They resumed walking, their pace unhurried as if savoring this rare moment of clarity between them. Back at the hotel, things were already beginning to shift. Ethan had approached Alexander's wife before they left earlier that day, his face flushed with embarrassment, but his voice steady as he apologized for how he had treated her. She had listened patiently, her expression unreadable until he finished speaking. "Thank you," she had said finally, her tone neither cold nor warm, but somewhere in between. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." And then she had added gently but firmly, "Just remember, kindness costs nothing." Those words lingered with Ethan long after she walked away. He replayed them in his mind over and over again like a mantra, vowing silently to never make anyone feel the way he had made her feel that day. Elsewhere in the hotel, staff members were having their own quiet moments of introspection. Some talked among themselves about what had happened. Others kept their thoughts private, but no less profound. There was an unspoken understanding that this wasn't just about one incident. It was about redefining what their work meant and who they wanted to be as individuals and as a team. By the time Alexander and his wife returned home that evening, there was a sense of peace between them that hadn't been there in a long time. They sat together on their balcony overlooking the city skyline. Two people who had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, but who had come out stronger on the other side. As they sipped their tea in comfortable silence, Alexander found himself thinking about something his wife had said earlier. Kindness costs nothing. It was such a simple idea, so simple it almost seemed trivial, but it carried within it a profound truth. Because at its core, kindness wasn't just about being nice or polite. It was about recognizing the humanity in others, their struggles, their dreams, their worth, and treating them with the respect they deserved regardless of who they were or where they came from. And maybe, just maybe, if more people embraced that idea, not just in hotels or businesses, but in life itself, the world could be a little brighter for everyone. As night fell and stars began to the sky above them like scattered diamonds on velvet, Alexander leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, that much was certain, but tonight felt like a beginning. A beginning built not on wealth or power or prestige, but on something far more enduring. Compassion.